United States launched a targeted operation in Abbottabad, Pakistan. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
Earlier this year, America shot dead the Al-Qaeda leader in his hiding place in Pakistan. Publicly, Pakistan is one of America's closest allies, yet every step of the operation was kept secret from it. This series tells the hidden story of how for a decade, Pakistan deceived America and the West, and was then found out.
Unfortunately, one guy we missed, that's the number one guy, and so we got all the blame.
You didn't have to be Sherlock Holmes to put the dots together. Pakistan was playing a double game and double dealing us.
It's a story that begins with the hunt for Al-Qaeda.
I'm a native New Yorker, I'm thinking in my heart, this is revenge.
But it's also a story of how and why Pakistan continues to give secret support to the Taliban.
First, they support us by providing a place to hide. Secondly, they provide us with weapons.
Above all, it is the story of how Pakistan, a supposed ally, stands accused by top Western intelligence officers and diplomats of causing the deaths of thousands of coalition soldiers in Afghanistan. Deaths that continue to this day.
We're literally seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fighters pouring in from Pakistan.
I think it was quite clear to us that the Pakistanis were playing very much a double game.
The stakes here are huge.
The Taliban has been given the opportunity to surrender all the terrorists in Afghanistan and to close down their camps and operations. Full warning has been given, and time is running out. The United States is presenting a clear choice to every nation. Stand with the civilized world or stand with the terrorists. And for those nations that stand with the terrorists, there will be a heavy price.
The Taliban regime ignored President Bush's threat. It refused to hand over Osama bin Laden.
My fellow Americans, let's roll.
A month after 9/11, the United States began to bomb Afghanistan, from where the attacks had been planned. The Americans' aim was to employ their military might to prevent Afghanistan being used again as a terrorist base, and to destroy Al-Qaeda. Their allies were the Northern Alliance, made up of local Afghan warlords united by their hatred of the Taliban. US Special Forces and CIA agents were directing operations on the ground. Their commander was Gary Bernson.
Well, of course, for me, I'm a native New Yorker, I'm not ashamed to say the fact that for me this was in a way, I'm thinking in my heart, this is revenge. They have come in, they have killed our people. I am going to deliver justice to as many of these people as possible. We're going to dispatch them to the next world.
As the bombing intensified, some senior Taliban commanders retreated to the airfield at Kunduz in northern Afghanistan. But they were not alone. Before 9/11, neighboring Pakistan had been the Taliban's closest ally. Events had moved so fast, the Taliban still had their Pakistani military advisors with them. Now the Pakistanis were still secretly supporting the Taliban, even though they'd said in public they were on the American side. What happened next in Kunduz was the first evidence of an audacious Pakistani double cross that would last a decade.
In December of 2001, as American forces, American air power, and the Northern Alliance on the ground was putting the Taliban to the knife across the country, one of the more difficult episodes that really made it very, very difficult to trust the Pakistanis was the Kunduz airlift. And the Northern Alliance came to me in a fit of rage, stating that Pakistani aircraft were landing in Kunduz on an airfield and were evacuating the Taliban. And I actually asked Amrullah Saleh, who would later become the Northern Alliance Chief of Intelligence, I asked him if he was smoking hashish. I just couldn't believe it. Those planes did fly in. The stated reason for them entering was, of course, to evacuate some of the military officers that had been up there. But the truth is the Taliban fought their way onto those planes, and an air corridor allowed many of the leadership of the Taliban's Northern Command to be flown out of Afghanistan while the rest of us were trying to destroy them. I was horrified by the duplicity on the Pakistanis' part.
One of the Taliban fighters uses the name Commander Aziz. He's still active in the Taliban and has hidden his identity. He is speaking publicly for the first time.
We saw wounded and dead everywhere. On the roads, in the streets. Everybody was escaping, chased by the enemy.
Aziz claims to have watched as the Pakistani military airlifted not just their personnel, but also his Taliban commanders.
I literally saw it with my own eyes. The program of evacuation began around 4 p.m. and went on until about 11 at night. The roars of the planes to take them away could be heard the entire time. God knows everything. The military planes transferred them in about 10 flights.
The problem with Pakistan is that they had deceived us in Kunduz. I think it demonstrated their true colors.
In the Pakistani capital, Islamabad, there was a hidden determination to help the Taliban live to fight another day. 2 weeks before Kunduz, the head of Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI, traveled to a secret meeting. General Mahmoud Ahmed was one of the most powerful men in Pakistan's military regime. He had nurtured the Taliban since their rise to power. General Mahmoud, it is claimed, told the Taliban ambassador Murazaev that whatever was said publicly, Pakistan and the ISI would still secretly support the Taliban.
General Mahmoud وغوښتله چې سره وویني نو دا بیا دا وویل چې موږ تاسو سره موږ به د افغانانو سره یو موږ به د جهاد سره یو موږ پخوا په جهاد کې وو پاکستان ما په کتاب کې هم لیکل چې هغوی دوه مخي سیاست وچلاوه امریکا ته به یو څه ویل موږ ته به بل څه ویل پاکستان دوه مخي سیاست و.
In the 1990s, Pakistan had helped create the Taliban to prevent Afghanistan falling under the influence of India, Pakistan's enduring enemy.
Of course, for Pakistan, the overwhelming obsession is India. This eternal worry that India is using Afghanistan to surround Pakistan. So that is the central obsession. And, of course, as every state is entitled to do, their priority is their national security and survival. And they regard the Americans and us as somewhat impermanent, fair-weather friends.
Support for the Taliban ran through the highest levels of Pakistan's military and intelligence establishment.
Will Taliban go away? They're not going to go away. Eventually it is they who are going to be on our borders. We have to coexist with them. We have to learn to live with them. Can we afford to have a hostile Afghanistan on our back? No, we cannot. The collective wisdom of the nation says that we must continue to have good linkages with Taliban. It is in Pakistan's national interest. And I think everybody knows that it is in Pakistan's national interest.
Pakistan's support for the Taliban did not come as news to the CIA. Philip Mudd was briefing the White House regularly. He was in Afghanistan in that autumn of 2001.
I was there on the ground, and the Americans said, well, you must be with us. We just lost 3,000 people. Well, not everybody was. And we shouldn't be surprised to find not only that there were people in Pakistan who before 9/11 were supporting the Taliban. Of course there were. They were trying to create a friend on their back door. And I remember watching things like the Kunduz operation saying we shouldn't be surprised that there were sympathizers within the Pakistani Security Service.
The powerful Pakistani security service, the ISI, or Inter-Services Intelligence, operates from this headquarters in Islamabad. The ISI is part of the military. Its agents are mostly soldiers, and it's always commanded by a senior general. In the 1980s, it worked with the CIA and MI6 to support the Afghan Mujahideen fighting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan.
I've worked with the ISI for more than 3 decades. It is part of the Pakistani army, but it operates generally beyond the control of the Pakistani government as a whole. There are many gray areas about the ISI's behavior.
There's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, wanted, dead or alive. All I want, America wants him brought to justice. That's what we want.
In early December 2001, in the weeks following the Kunduz airlift, more Taliban fighters were cornered, this time in the Afghan mountains of Tora Bora, close to the border with Pakistan. With them were fighters from Al-Qaeda, an estimated 1,500 men in all. The CIA's Gary Benson discovered Osama bin Laden was tantalizingly within reach.
One of our people picks up a radio. It's essentially a hunting radio. Nothing complicated, no encryption. This is what they're using to talk with one another. We were able to actually listen to them speak to one another and assess, their position. He actually saw bin Laden, and his son came out, reported, gave us a pretty good description. We thought, okay, this is who this is. We've got B-52s, we've got B-1s, we've got B-2s, F-16s, everything in the U.S. arsenal, every aircraft that you can strap a bomb onto is flying in there and dropping weapons on Tora Bora.
But to Benson's frustration, U.S. Central Command refused to send the extra ground troops that he requested. And the Taliban fighters, together with bin Laden and his men, had a potential escape route across the Afghan border and into Pakistan.
The critical piece in this, of course, was we are told that the Pakistani Frontier Force will cover the back of the mountain. And that statement from the Pakistanis convinced the U.S. that they didn't need to send additional forces in. It was a miscalculation on the part of the U.S.
But the trapped Taliban fighters and their Al-Qaeda guests needed help somehow to reach the border. There are allegations it came from familiar quarters, as one of the most influential Northern Alliance warlords, Zahir Qadir, reveals.
بس تقریبا ما هغه وخت 1200 عسكر خپل برابر کړم او د راغلو هغه وخت زوما ایسر سمانو او حاجي صاحب حضرت علي موږ درې کسان د جنگ قومندانانو د تورې بوړې.
The three Afghan warlords convened a secret meeting to agree tactics. One of them, Haji Zaman, came up with a controversial plan to grant the Taliban a 12-hour ceasefire so they could gather their men and weapons and surrender.
چې حاجي زمان یو ایډیا راوړله چې دغه القاعده چې دلته دي طالبان دوی وایي چې موږ ته سبا 8 بجو پورې وخت راکړي او دوی تسلیمیږي. ما د دې خبرې مخالفت وکړو چې موږ وخت نه ورکوو. زه په دې پوهېدم چې دوی نه تسلیمیږي. دوی یو چانس د تېښتې لپاره ځان ته غوښتو او هغه یې پیدا کړلو.
Qadia's fears were borne out. Many of the Taliban and their Al-Qaeda guests used the ceasefire to head for the border. To Qadia, it was evidence that his fellow warlord Haji Zaman had double-crossed him. Zaman had once been a major Taliban commander himself and was known to have had links with the ISI in the past.
ISI همدغه وکړل چې فرض کړه حاجي زمان کومه خبره وکړله هغه د حاجي زمان خبره نه وه. هغوی ته چانس ورکول شولو. 115 کسان القاعده دغه هغوی لاړل ووتل د افغانستان نه او په قوي ګمان او اغلب ګمان داسې ویل کېدل چې اسامه بن لادن هم د دوی سره د سیز فایر دا یو پلان شده کار و. حاجي زمان دا د ISI خاص سړی و هملته و. هغه په توره بوړه کې د ماغول خلک و.
Qadia's claims are impossible to verify, and Haji Zaman was assassinated when he returned to Afghanistan last year. What is certain is that in the months after America attacked, most of the Taliban fighters escaped, alongside their Al-Qaeda allies. One middle-ranking Taliban commander who got away at Tora Bora, and is still an active fighter, reveals where they ended up. He's an Afghan who uses the name Mullah Qasim, but asked for his real identity to be kept hidden.
We fought for some time, but later on we escaped. We all wanted to reach safety. We went to places safe from bombardment, but when we were invaded, we escaped to Pakistan. We had no problem at the border. Then we went to Peshawar. We got together into groups of 4 or 5 people who we trusted. The police were not arresting or jailing Afghans when they saw us, so we didn't face many difficulties.
The escaping Taliban fighters were members of the Pashtun tribe. The Pashtuns are spread across Pakistan's tribal areas and southern Afghanistan, linked by language and ethnicity. They don't recognize the border between the two countries.
They were coming back to their own kith and kin, coming to Pakistan, who had been supporting them against the Soviets, providing them the sanctuary and the base for the last decade or so. We have very deep relations with them. They were welcome. We have the same blood running in our veins.
Senior figures in Pakistan's intelligence and military establishment were already aware that the Taliban had survived to fight another day.
Did you think that the Taliban had been defeated?
No. I mean, to be very exact, the total casualty they suffered was about 1,100 who were killed. The rest had hidden themselves, they had fallen back.
The war in Afghanistan seemed over. A new government under President Hamid Karzai took power, backed by America and its allies. America no longer cared about the Taliban. Its primary target, as it always had been, was Al-Qaeda, which now meant hunting them down in Pakistan.
The Taliban had always been quite distinct organizationally from Al-Qaeda, and I did not see the Taliban as being a real material threat. We were focused like a laser beam on Al-Qaeda. These were the people who were responsible for 9/11. These were the people who we feared, if they managed to make good their escape, would continue attacking U.S. interests around the world. That was by far our number one priority, and we didn't want anything to interfere with that.
Some of their leadership started going into urban spaces of Pakistan. So in the spring, you've got the fundamental problem in this campaign, and that is starting to try to find people in urban areas of Pakistan and starting to try to figure out how we could work with the Pakistanis on that.
The next 18 months through 2002 and 2003 seemed to show the US and Pakistan cooperating against Al-Qaeda through their spy agencies, the ISI and the CIA. The Taliban's survival mattered to Pakistan. Al-Qaeda's didn't. And each arrest helped unlock what would become billions of dollars of US military aid.
The ISI would do confirmatory checks on the ground, focusing specifically on Al-Qaeda, the Arab members of Al-Qaeda who had fled out of Afghanistan. We and the Pakistanis had perfected a methodology for conducting raids to capture these people. And it was just a series of rolling raids, almost night after night. And that was the way that we did business in those early days.
But even then, there were limits to US-Pakistani cooperation. In the past, the ISI had built close links with various Pakistani militant groups fighting India in the disputed territory of Kashmir, and even with Al-Qaeda. Now, the ISI went to great lengths to cover these tracks, as became evident during the disappearance of an American journalist in early 2002. On the 23rd of January, the 38-year-old Daniel Pearl was kidnapped in the Pakistani city of Karachi. It soon emerged that the militant group that had abducted him was one of those fighting Indian troops in Kashmir, with, the CIA suspected, the secret support of the ISI.
I think to the extent that some of those extremists may have been affiliated with groups that had received some measure of support from the army of Pakistan in the past, those were details which the Pakistanis would not particularly have wanted to come to light.
2 weeks later, with Pearl still missing, the British-born mastermind of the kidnap, Omar Sheikh, decided to hand himself in to the authorities, but not to the police. Omar Sheikh had links with the ISI stretching back to the 1990s, and he now chose to give himself up to a former ISI official. The ISI kept the news secret.
Omar Sheikh, we had reason to believe that he had been detained, and specifically by the ISI, and so I went to a very trusted counterpart within the ISI and said, "How about it? Do you have it?" And he said, "Well, let me look into it." And he came back to me a few hours later. He said, "Nope, we don't have it." And I knew he was lying to me.
Eventually, but only under extreme pressure, the ISI did hand over Omar Sheikh to the police.
Later, he himself said in open court that he had been detained by the ISI and had been kept for some 7 or 8 days or so. And we can only guess what those conversations were like. I suspect that he was strongly encouraged by the ISI not to say too much about his past life. I think that the Pakistanis were probably concerned about what other stories he might tell.
In particular, there were suspicions that before 9/11, the ISI had indeed encouraged such groups to develop contacts with Al-Qaeda. The closeness of the links between Omar Sheikh's group and Al-Qaeda was soon to be brutally demonstrated. The local police chief, Detective Fayaz Khan, takes up the story.
मैं 2001 से यही काम कर रहा हूँ CID में और सैकड़ों गिरफ्तारियां कर चुका हूं। हमें ये जिम्मेदारी सौंपी गई कि हम भी इस काम में काम करें और देखें कि ये क्या हुआ है। कहने पर उसके बाद उसको एक छोटा सा कमरा था वहां पे जहां इन्होंने कैद में रखा, और उसके बाद जब लास्ट डे खारी शेख मोहम्मद और ये तमाम लोग आए हैं अलकायदा के लोग जिन्होंने इसको फिर ज़िबा किया, तो वो भी उसके जो ज़िबा किया गया वो भी इसी प्लॉट के अंदर किया गया। और वहीं फजल करीम ने ये भी बताया कि वहीं पे उसने एक निशानदेही की एक जगह की जहां उसको लाश के टुकड़े टुकड़े करके उन्होंने उसमें जमीन में दफन किया था।
The man who beheaded Daniel Pearl was the self-proclaimed Al-Qaeda mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. When, a year later, he was arrested by the ISI in the military town of Rawalpindi, the Pakistanis claimed it showed they were indispensable in the battle against Al-Qaeda.
If you look at the wanted list which the United States issued, most of those guys were actually nabbed by the ISI. So ISI was very active and has been keeping a watch in all the cities. But then it's a country of 180 million people. So ISI has been active in all the cities looking for Al-Qaeda, picking them up. Unfortunately, one guy we missed. That's the number one guy. And so we got all the blame.
But even in the early days of 2002 and 2003, the Americans had doubts about Pakistan. Inside the CIA, it was noted that no senior Taliban figures were arrested during this period. For all the arrests of Al-Qaeda members like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the CIA questioned the true motives of Pakistan's military dictator, General Pervez Musharraf.
Pakistan, and particularly General Musharraf, played the Bush administration like a fiddle. They gave us just enough in terms of Al-Qaeda to keep the Bush administration happy, but not enough to actually eliminate Al-Qaeda as an organization, and virtually nothing on the Taliban. Musharraf knew that before every major meeting between the two of them, he needed to reinforce his stock, and he did that by giving us a prominent Al-Qaeda operative. The Pakistanis would fortuitously, on the verge of a summit meeting between Bush and Musharraf, produce number 3, number 4 in the Al-Qaeda hierarchy, and that way take away any criticism that might come from the Americans over Pakistan's double game.
Meanwhile, the reports from Islamabad that were reaching the British at this time seemed to bear out the American claims. Colonel Richard Kemp was working at the heart of Whitehall, and intelligence reports from MI5 and MI6 passed across his desk.
I think it was quite clear to us that the Pakistanis were playing very much a double game, and a lot of what they were saying and some of what they were doing was very clearly aimed at the eyes of the West, and didn't necessarily reflect their real intentions, their real actions. So I think we felt that there would be elements of the Taliban who were still being supported by Pakistan, who Pakistan was still prepared to have operating on its territory.
The clearest evidence for this double game lay in the Pakistani town of Quetta, just across the border from the Afghan province of Helmand. In 2003, the Taliban set up a government in exile there. Christina Lamb was reporting from Pakistan at the time.
In 2003, I was in Quetta, and Quetta was like Taliban Central. Taliban were everywhere. You could see them all over the town, and there was training camps. You could see recruiting going on, fundraising, and it was all quite open.
From this sanctuary, the Taliban began to launch attacks against the forces of the new Afghan government and the US troops supporting them. Pakistan did not stop the attacks. Mullah Qasim, a Taliban commander, was one of those who used Quetta as a base.
We were sent to different places over the border in Afghanistan, places like Paktika and Khost. We would cross the border and carry out operations there, depending on what equipment we had. Once we'd used up our ammunition, we'd return to our base and another group would take our place. So we were able to keep it going. For a fighter, there are two important things: supplies and a place to hide. Pakistan plays a significant role. First, they support us by providing a place to hide, which is really important. Secondly, they provide us with weapons.
The American troops still in Afghanistan had been told the Taliban had been defeated and that Pakistan was their ally. Their commander, General Dan McNeil, found the truth on the ground was the opposite. The Taliban was reconstituting itself as a fighting force, helped by Pakistan.
Along the border, there's an Afghan town called Shkeen. It was always a difficult place. It continues to be to this day. So we had our little forward operating base there, a very small one, very light footprint, but it was sufficient for what we needed it to do.
We got the imagery right here, so
Hey, mark that. So one night, late 2002, we observed a dismounted patrol, might have been 20 or 30 people, come across the border out of Angarado, which is the Pakistani village on the other side of the border from Shkeen. It was clear that they meant mischief and malice. We watched them come by a Pakistani Frontier Corps facility. They walked right by the walls. Anybody who was manning those walls or guarding the gate, I think, would have to see them without question. They were going to attack the Afghan outpost and wait for us to come out in our mounted quick reaction force, and they were going to ambush the quick reaction force. So we had to quickly devise a plan to ambush the ambushers. And that indeed is the way it unfolded. We watched the remnants of that force go back pretty much the same way they came, going back into Pakistan. Someone had to know they were walking. And when I talked the next day or so to the Pakistani brothers about it, if I remember correctly, it was the division commander who was up in that area. No, it didn't happen that way. Couldn't have happened. They didn't come by our place. And
while Pakistan proclaimed itself the ally of America, it was simultaneously allowing itself to be the Taliban's sanctuary. For Mullah Qasim and his comrades, it was the difference between life and death.
During the night, we planted mines. There is a kind of plane that makes a droning sound. They are called computer planes, whatever. They followed us. Later on, helicopters came. My friend was wounded. Pakistan is our second home. We feel safer in Pakistan than we do in Afghanistan. We took him to a private hospital in Peshawar. If a Talib gets injured and is taken to the hospital, he's accepted regardless.
In Kabul, the new government's intelligence chief monitored the Taliban resurgence with dismay. Amrullah Saleh was part of a government that bitterly resented Pakistan's role in supporting the Taliban.
If a wounded guy goes to one of our hospitals and say, treat me, the doctor will ask, how did you got injured? But when a Taliban gets wounded, the entire medical system of Pakistan is in his service. Nobody asks him, where were you wounded? The Pakistanis never dismantled the infrastructure which was supporting the Taliban back in the 90s.
The charge sheet against Pakistan was growing. In late 2003, Colonel Tony Shaffer was working for US military intelligence in eastern Afghanistan.
It was very clear that there was major support being provided to the Taliban in Pakistan in some form. The most notable evidence we had early on was a female intelligence operative, an ISI operative, being rolled up as part of a Taliban raiding party. This was something that you could not deny. There was vetting done to verify this female operative's affiliation with the ISI. And apparently there was a great effort made behind the scenes to bring her back. I was of a mind, as were other officers sent to Guantanamo Bay. We believed that that would be the adequate disposition. Unfortunately, politics came into play, and eventually she was returned to the Pakistani ISI. So in my eyes, and the eyes of others who I was working with, it was irrefutable evidence of Pakistani support for the Taliban.
The American claim is lent further credence by the Taliban commander Mullah Qasim, who says he witnessed the ISI in action.
I have seen the ISI dressed as mullahs, as preachers, as Muslim scholars. They do come, but they don't come in uniform. The Taliban movement was created with the help of the ISI. It is like when a tree grows. One has to plant it and water it.
Supported by Pakistan, the Taliban killed 52 and wounded hundreds of American troops in Afghanistan in 2004. But as long as Pakistan helped hunt Al-Qaeda, America was willing to downplay what they saw as Pakistan's duplicity.
President George W. Bush.
2004 was an election year. 7,000 miles away in Washington, the president wanted to claim progress in the war on terror.
Our strategy is succeeding. 4 years ago, Pakistan was a transit point for terrorist groups. Today, Pakistan is capturing terrorist leaders, and more than 3/4 of Al-Qaeda's key members and associates have been detained or killed. And America and the world are safer.
President Bush had already formally named Pakistan as a major non-NATO ally in recognition of its role in fighting Al-Qaeda.
I think the Bush administration for a long time was in denial about Pakistani behavior. The Pakistanis were our most important ally in going after Al-Qaeda. Their duplicity in continuing to support the Taliban was something the Bush administration didn't want to face up to.
You've got the state diplomatic interests of, look, we need the Pakistanis, and we can't insult them and embarrass them. We need to work with these guys. Everybody acknowledges that. So there's only so much pressing you can do if you want to get the kind of positive reaction from them that we all know we need.
Meanwhile, Pakistan's apparent willingness to barter Al-Qaeda figures to divert American attention from its support for the Taliban had provoked a reaction from Al-Qaeda and its sympathizers.
14 people have died in a failed assassination attempt on the President of Pakistan. It's the second time in less than a fortnight that President Pervez Musharraf has been targeted. His motorcade was heading towards the capital, Islamabad, when it was attacked.
In December 2003, 2 2 assassination attempts were made on the Pakistani president. Both were thought to have been masterminded by Pakistani militant groups working in association with Al-Qaeda.
2 attempts were made on him. And the people who were caught, there were 3 from his own commando unit. There were 2 from his security. 5 of them were hanged for the crime that they had committed.
The attacks were eventually blamed on Amjad Faruqi, an Islamic militant with links to Al-Qaeda. In retaliation, President Musharraf ordered the army to attack Al-Qaeda and their allies in their stronghold of South Waziristan, in the heart of Pakistan's untamed tribal areas.
Musharraf was told, look, the mastermind is there in Waziristan. And at that time, Waziristan was a kind of in a point of boiling. And Musharraf, without a second thought, he unleashed the army on them.
The fighting that followed was fierce. But at the height of the offensive, an incident took place that raised American doubts about whether Pakistani intelligence could be trusted when it came to hunting down Al-Qaeda's top leadership. Spies working for the Americans had pinpointed bin Laden's number 2, Ayman al-Zawahiri, in the Pakistani town of Wana, capital of South Waziristan.
The bad guys, if you will, Al-Qaeda and Taliban, had set up at a place called the Al-Qaeda Hotel. And this was a full-on hotel which was actively a headquarters for everything that we could see going on to conduct operations to kill people. The most notable interest we had was that there was a pattern of what we would call a high-value target, HVT. The patterns of activity, the patterns of communication indicated that there was a large fish there. We found out that Dr. Zawahiri was hanging out there, and this information was passed to the Pakistanis. The information was promptly used to plan a great military operation using the Pakistani army, and the end result was pretty much nothing.
I was in Wana, and I am the one who carried out this operation. And once we got the information, there were reports that some elements are there. So the operation started early morning with the first flight. And first the aviation and the special forces, they went in. And they went in and killed a number of people. But by the time the ground forces, which I was commanding, went in, number of dead bodies were there, but others had been taken, and any surviving members might have fled.
Although the Pakistani military had captured many Al-Qaeda prisoners, the most high-value target, Zawahiri himself, was not among them.
We found out that 24 hours before going in, the HVT, in this case Dr. Zawahiri, was given fair warning that you're about to be attacked, you better skedaddle. And the reason being is because the ISI was able to give tip-off information to the Al-Qaeda and Taliban folks in the safe haven and allow them to escape ahead of the attack.
The Americans suspected the ISI of secretly protecting Zawahiri, because while the Al-Qaeda threat remained high, the case for continued US aid to Pakistan remained strong.
When you're running these operations, I think you have a legitimate concern that the people you're dealing with, a few of them, might let that information out the back door. And that clearly was a concern we had over time. If you develop critical information on a point target that's unique and perishable, you just can't afford to let that stuff go out the back door, because that target will spook immediately. He'll go back to plotting. You might not pick him up for another year or two.
The Pakistanis deny the charge that they deliberately let Zawahiri get away. What is clear is that Zawahiri continued in overall charge of Al-Qaeda's military operations for the next 5 years. During that time, Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for 313 attacks, resulting in the deaths of 3,010 people. And since Osama bin Laden's death earlier this year, Zawahiri has become the new Al-Qaeda leader. After the Battle of Wana, the first of a series of truces was struck. The Pakistanis would back off Al-Qaeda and their local allies if they agreed not to attack Pakistani targets. But to American frustration, throughout this period, the Pakistani military had not confronted the Taliban fighters who continued to attack the Americans in Afghanistan from their bases in Pakistan.
It's been a long war for a lot of people. I think the first time I ever killed a man certainly had an effect on me. It's been a difficult campaign in which lost several friends, and I think that heightens the frustration that I have about Pakistan.
To Captain Andrew Exum, who was part of a Special Operations Task Force, one particular incident stands out.
In the spring of 2004, I was leading a quick reaction force of U.S. Army Rangers in eastern Afghanistan. And we got spun up one night because the Ranger unit that was in a blocking position down in the border with Pakistan had come under fire. The quick reaction force, that unit had a young Ranger named Pat Tillman, who was a U.S. football star. And in that firefight, he was killed by friendly fire, actually from his own unit. In the aftermath of his death, people lost sight of the fact of why those Rangers were there on the border in the first place. They were there in the expectation of a Pakistani army offensive through Waziristan that was going to push these militants out of Waziristan and back into Afghanistan. And obviously that never took place. And I think that in Tillman's death you see so much the futility with which this conflict has been waged in light of our partner in Afghanistan that at times has been incompetent, at times has simply not had the capacity or the will to take on these militant groups, and at times, and in instances, has been complicit with these militant groups.
The Ford operating base was renamed in honor of the young football star.
वो देखो मुजाहिद मुसलमान देखो मुजाहिद मुसलमान की शान देखो.
Meanwhile, the CIA made another discovery that was to have lethal repercussions. Inside Pakistan, scores of training camps had been built to help teach Taliban fighters how to kill American soldiers. Mullah Qasim was an early recruit.
It was like a workshop. The important thing was that we should be able to convince people. The Americans and British who'd come to your country hadn't come to build it, but to destroy it. Your country has been invaded. Remember your ancestors who made the British run away and successfully fought the Russians. In the name of Islam, you should gather people together and get them ready for jihad.
Another Taliban commander, who still actively fights under the name of Mullah Azizullah, says many of his teachers were from Pakistani intelligence. He's asked to hide his identity.
They are all the ISI's men. They're the ones who run the training. First they train us about bombs. Then they give us practical guidance. Their generals are everywhere. They are present during the training.
The official spokesman for the ISI denies that there was any such support for the camps. camps, they got probably reinitiated by themselves when the Taliban crossed over from Afghanistan in 2001-2 and they started reorganizing. So to say that these militant groups were being supported by the state with the organized camps in these areas, etc., I think nothing could be further from the truth. The official denial is dismissed by Latif Afridi, one of Pakistan's senior judges and a native of the tribal area. He has no doubt about the importance of Pakistani intelligence to the Taliban training camps.
Would it have been possible for those camps to have been created without the knowledge of the ISI?
No, it was not possible. See, during this period, ISI had trained guerrilla fighters. People say there are 600 Chinese, there are Punjabis, there are, you see, Chechens, there are Arabs, there are Tajiks, God knows how many other people from other nationalities. But these people have been allowed with the explicit approval of our agencies.
But the ISI were not the only backers of the camps, according to another middle-ranking Taliban commander, breaking his silence for the first time. Still fighting under the name of Najib, he joined the insurgency 8 years ago.
I was in the camp for a month. They were giving us practical training in whatever weapons we specialized in. I was trained to fly RPGs. The instructors were from Al-Qaeda. We were all Al-Qaeda. They were preaching about the importance of jihad, and suicide bombers were taken to a different section and were kept apart from us. Those who were taught to be suicide bombers were there.
The CIA were becoming aware of the scale of the Taliban training camps and the fact that Al-Qaeda were talent-spotting potential suicide bombers.
What we were seeing is people, for example, kids from Britain, kids from North America, showing up in little training compounds in the tribal areas. In some cases, you might have Al-Qaeda running them. I'm talking about the core group of Al-Qaeda people who were charged with training and sending people into Western Europe and North America.
In the winter of 2004, 2 young British men made the long journey to Pakistan to be trained for jihad. While there, they were singled out by Al-Qaeda, who decided that they would be more useful to the jihadi cause if they returned home to conduct operations there.
Hi, there's a bus just exploded outside in Tavistock Square, just outside my window. There's people lying on the ground and everything. There's a London bus, it's a 30 I think, but there's people dead and everything by the looks of it.
On 7/7 I was in my office in Whitehall in the Cabinet Office and I received notification of explosions in the London Underground and obviously this was not an accident, this was obviously Britain was under attack.
The intelligence reports soon revealed the bombers' visits to the training camps in Pakistan.
Over a number of years I've been monitoring international terrorist activity, not just in the UK but around the globe, and I'd seen in virtually every case links back into Pakistan, so it didn't come in anywhere as a surprise to find that terrorists operating in the UK were being directed by Al-Qaeda leaders in Pakistan.
The British also suspected the role of Pakistani intelligence in the training camps.
The ISI, of course, must take responsibility for the fact that some of these camps were still up and running, including perhaps the camp that was responsible for training the 7/7 attackers.
The new influx of suicide bombers trained in the camps soon made their presence felt on the ground in Afghanistan too.
The numbers on suicide attacks, 2003 in Afghanistan, there were 2 suicide attacks. 2004, there were 5 suicide attacks. 2005, there were 17 suicide attacks in Afghanistan. Those are the 3 primary years I was there. The following year, in 2006, there were 139 suicide attacks. That leads me to suspect that our friends in Pakistan may have decided to re-energize the Taliban so that they would have a proxy force in whatever was going to happen after the Americans were gone.
But the Americans too must shoulder some responsibility for the resurgent Taliban. In the years after 9/11, the Americans had shown little interest in rebuilding Afghanistan, which helped the Taliban to take root and prosper. Then in 2005, just as the Taliban was becoming an effective fighting force, the Americans decided to hand over military control to NATO. The Americans wanted to concentrate on Iraq instead. The decision was to have momentous consequences, as the Taliban sensed an opportunity and stepped up their attacks.
The night before I went back into one particular area, this was in Helmand province in the spring of 2006. A friend of mine came and knocked on my door and said, "Look, Mike, as your friend, as your classmate, I'm begging you not to go in there. We're literally seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fighters pouring in from Pakistan, and it is not what you think it is anymore." And he was truly concerned for my life, and it turned out to be a very legitimate concern. There were many times when I didn't know if I was going to live. We experienced insurgents crossing the border within very close proximity of Pakistani military posts. We experienced both artillery and rocket fire from the other side of the border that the Pakistanis didn't respond to. We were experiencing 200, 300, 400-man ambushes. These were very sophisticated, 3-sided ambushes, particularly along the Helmand River Valley. Things as sophisticated as floating barges with RPG and mortar teams, multiple layers of mortar, artillery, and heavy machine guns. It was definitely a turn for the worse in both the security situation, but also the insurgents' capabilities.
Major Mike Waltz, who had spent 2 years in the field, during which time the Taliban attacks on coalition troops had more than doubled, now returned to Washington in 2006 as an advisor to the Pentagon on the Afghan desk.
My message coming back to Washington, particularly on the state of the Taliban, was that the insurgency had reconstituted, the security situation was getting appreciably worse, and that if we didn't adopt a different strategy, namely a counterinsurgency strategy and the resources to back it, that the situation was just going to continue to decline.
And yet this harsh appraisal and the critical role of Pakistan didn't shape British thinking. As part of the new NATO-led campaign, the British set off for Helmand province in southern Afghanistan, believing this was a peacekeeping and reconstruction mission.
We certainly didn't have a good handle on that at the time. And I don't think that the decision to go into Helmand was informed by intelligence. That then turned out to be a mistake. Without the support that Pakistan gives, without providing a safe haven and also physical support and in some cases direction, I don't think the Taliban could have operated and could have built themselves up in the way they did.
Not bad! White House Green building on that target, done?
Almost immediately, the British troops found themselves in the most brutal and intense combat the army had seen for decades. At times, they were in danger of being overrun.
One of the first fatalities that I was there was 3 guys that were attached to the company were killed one night. And that obviously really brings it home quite a sobering sense. This isn't what we're supposed to be doing. Defending places. We're supposed to be having a positive effect, not being tied down and exchanging fire with Taliban.
What was by now unmistakable to the West was that Pakistan's complicity with the Taliban was costing British lives.
By 2006, it was abundantly clear that the Pakistani intelligence service was orchestrating the revival of the Afghan Taliban. And to me, that was the moment when it was clear we'd been double dealt. We had our suspicions before then, but 2006, it was unequivocal. The Afghan Taliban were back. They were surging across southern Afghanistan, and they could only do that if they had the support of the Pakistani intelligence service.
Next time on Secret Pakistan, the double cross is discovered. America strikes back, but Pakistan's help to the Taliban continues.
Secret Pakistan continues at 9 next Wednesday, here on BBC Two.